What's up, everybody? I'm Sean Kelly, and this is the channel on everything real estate. We are now on chapter 2, property ownership and interest, where we dive in a little bit deeper from the concepts in chapter 1. Now we're going to get into the next section, which is probably the worst section in this entire series. I hope I just got you pumped up and ready for it. This entire next half will be on the test, so brace yourself. There are only 2 test questions from this entire chapter, yes. However, this chapter is a foundational chapter. So a lot of the things you learn in this chapter will be in all of those other chapters where there's multiple test questions from. So we're getting into property ownership and interest. So what is an estate? Any legal relationship someone has to a property, and there are only 2 real types. You own it or you lease it. Freehold is to own it, and non-freehold or leasehold is to rent it or lease it. It's actually pretty easy to remember. So within the freehold category, the own it category, there are 3 types. So there's fee simple or fee simple absolute. They mean the same thing. There's fee defeasible, and then there's life estate. Fee simple is everything in the bundle of rights, forever, unconditionally. This forms the greatest type of ownership and is the most common. Then fee simple defeasible adds some restriction. Think about defeasible as defeated. This can be defeated if not used for the purpose intended, and then it reverts back to the grantor. So think about if a school sells a piece of land right next to that school under fee defeasible and says that the next buyer has to build student housing or a student hospital or something for the students, or else it'll revert back to the school ownership. So here we have 2 parts of fee defeasible. There's conditions subsequent. You can do everything you want on this property except for one thing. You can build anything you want on this property except for a junkyard. You can build anything on this property except for a racetrack. Then there's determinable. You can only use this property for one thing. You can only use this property for building student housing. Take a second to determine which one of these is the most harsh. Hopefully you pick determinable. You are limited to only one use. You can only use this plot of land for student housing, rather than condition subsequent, where you can build whatever you want except for a junkyard. Let's get into life estate. So life estate is when real estate is determined by the life of a person. For a conventional life estate, when the grantor gives the property to the grantee and the grantee dies, the property then reverts back to the grantor. For life estate per ultra V, they always do all these Greek terms here. When a life estate for another is when the grantor gives property to the grantee, it is based off of the life of this third party down here. So when this third party dies, the grantee loses the property and the property goes back to the grantor. So this one's kind of hard to come up with an example for, but imagine I'm the grantor, right? And I give the property to, let's say I had a stepdad, right? I give the property, a vacation home to my stepdad, but I want it to base off of the life of my mom, right? So once my mom, God forbid, she passes, that property will be stripped from my stepdad and given back to me. I don't know when you would actually use this, but maybe this is an example here. I have a ton of money. Here you go, stepdad. I give you one because I love my mom so much. But now that she's gone, bye. And lastly, there is life estate with remainder interest. This is when the grantor gives a property to the grantee, and when the grantee dies, the property doesn't go back to me. It goes over here to a third person. This third person is called the remainder interest. To help memorize, reverting back means to change back. That happens in conditional life estate per ultra V. Remainder means who is left. So you have the grantor given to the grantee, this transaction's done. When this person dies, it goes to this remainder interest, the last person left. Life estate is also the only type of real estate that is not inheritable. If you own a house as a measuring life, you can't give it to somebody else when you die. Because when you die, it either goes back to the reversionary interest or it goes to the remainder man. A random term to know here is estovers. A life tenant can take a reasonable amount of timber and resources to build a structure. All right, let's head over to talking title. There's only a handful here, but this is the part I get stuck on the most. So to be honest, I went back and refreshed a little bit on this before telling you something wrong. It's not complicated, there's just a lot of similarities in the keywords. So there's severalty, there's tenants in common, there's joint tenancy, and there's tenancy by the entireties. So severalty is when one person or one entity owns it. When they die, it goes to their heirs. Tenancy in common is the most common and is defaulted for most unmarried people. Each person owns part of the property, but it doesn't have to be equal shares. Shares pass to their heirs at death, not to each other. Needs a suit of partition to break the deal up, which is a court order. Then there's joint tenancy, which there's 4 characteristics for this to be true. So all of them must buy it at the same time, all of them must be on the title, all of them must have interest in the property, and all of them must own it. Additionally, the shares are spread equally. They must have equal amount of shares. And there is right of survivorship here. So when one person dies, it'll go to the other owners of this property. Except for in North Carolina. You must specify right of survivorship here in North Carolina on the deed. Lastly, there is tenancy by the entireties. This is for property that is acquired after marriage. It is defaulted. Except for in North Carolina, again. You must specify and select right of survivorship here in North Carolina. Otherwise, it'll pass directly to the heirs. And just a couple of more notes to finish off this ownership section. Getting married never changes any form of ownership, and tenancy by the entirety is terminated upon death, divorce, or agreement. It is not terminated if you separate. Alright, there's quite a bit here for condominiums. Ownership of a unit is fee simple. Ownership of the common area is held under tenancy in common. That's a test question. The gym, pool, lobby, etc. are held in tenancy in common with your neighbors. The North Carolina Condominium Act is a disclosure. It requires a public offering statement which discloses your rules and your HOA requirements and any fees that come along with it. You have a 7-day rescission period to get all of your money out and back out of a contract with the condo. Personal areas like your own garage or your boat slip or personal balcony are called limited common areas and are usually transferred with a deed. Then there's cooperatives or co-ops. These are buildings that you have the right to lease if you buy shares. You don't actually have any type of ownership with these types of buildings. Then there are timeshares, which are considered real estate in North Carolina. I'm going to read off what constitutes a timeshare. So it must be used 5 or more separate time periods over a period of at least 5 years. Meaning a timeshare isn't a timeshare if the owner is only allowed to use it 4 times within 5 years. It must be 5 or more times within 5 years. A timeshare may be canceled for 5 days after contract execution. Money will be refunded within 30 days of contract execution. Also, remember that we said the North Carolina Real Estate Commission will never fine you? Well, the one time they can fine somebody is with a timeshare developer. Lastly, there's a rule of 5 that really helps. A timeshare must be able to be used 5 or more times within a 5-year period. There's a 5-day right of rescission to cancel out of your contract. And a developer may be fined $500 per violation by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Be sure to read up on timeshares, there's a lot there. Alright, let's get into encumbrances. These are a right or interest in a property by somebody other than the owner. Some examples are liens, easements, assessments, and taxes. Liens are when you owe somebody, and there's an order of importance here. Property taxes are first, special assessments, mechanics lien, like a contractor or plumber, and then there is foreclosure, and foreclosure actually becomes the #1 lien if there is a foreclosure involved. Easements are an interest someone else has on your property. An example is when somebody else has the right to drive on your property to get to their property. This is called an easement appurtenance. Another example would be a utility company having the right to go and work on some power lines on your property. And this is called an easement in gross. It's a third party who has that easement. When talking about easements, let's talk about condemnation. This is when the government takes the land for better use of the public. Better use. Who defines that? Eminent domain is the actual practice of the government taking your property. Encroachments are any physical things that impede on somebody else's property line. Think about somebody popping up a shed between your property lines. It's really hard to tell unless you have a survey done. This is why you always recommend your buyers get a survey done. You need to make sure that nothing is invading onto your property or that your property is invading onto somebody else's property. And just kind of a side topic here, now let's talk about CCNRs. CCNRs are covenants, conditions, and restrictions. These are usually in a subdivision and created by the builder. Just think about an HOA, for example. These are also enforced by the HOA. There is absolutely no government involved here. You can become sued though, so it's important to follow those covenants and restrictions. Alright, final review. That was a ton to take in. Let's see if we can take a breather and just review that second half there. I told y'all this would be one of the worst chapters. So an estate is the right or real interest in a property, while a tenant is someone who holds an estate. Two major types of estates are freehold, you own it, or leasehold, you rent it. Fee simple transfer is a transfer of all rights in the bundle, forever, unconditionally. Anytime the interest goes back to the grantor, it is a reversion. If it goes anywhere else, it is a remainder. Severalty ownership is when only one person holds ownership. Tenancy in common is the most common and is defaulted for unmarried people. Joint tenancy must include bought at the same time, be on the title together, have interest, and own it with equal shares. And test question, getting married never changes any form or type of ownership. So additional forms of ownership are condos, co-ops, timeshares, and PUDs. Condos are fee simple ownership with tenancy in common over the shared areas. Co-ops are leased by buying shares. I left one out earlier, townhomes. These are horizontally laid out and you own your foundation. Timeshares must be used 5 or more times within a 5-year period, and you have a 5-day right of rescission, and the North Carolina Real Estate Commission can fine a developer $500 per violation. PUDs are planned unit developments like a neighborhood. Encumbrances means a limitation of use. Somebody else has ownership or interest in your property. Liens, easements, taxes, and special assessments are the examples there. Liens are when you owe money to somebody. The government is not involved in the enforcement of HOA rules. Deed restrictions are imposed and set forth by previous property owners. Easements are when somebody else has a right to use your land for a specific purpose, like driving through it. Encroachment is anything physical that imposes on the property line of another. And a survey is a professional measurement of a property boundaries and other items within the boundaries, such as the house location, sidewalks, your septic tank, and your well, other things. Well, that was a rough chapter, maybe the hardest one in this entire series. The great thing is that there are only a couple of test questions based off of this chapter. However, again, this chapter is very foundational and a lot of the information from this chapter will be spread throughout the entire rest of the series, so it's important to know. And everybody, if you are interested in following along with the rest of the series, go ahead and smash that subscribe button down below. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you enjoy this video. I would really appreciate it. The YouTube algorithm would really appreciate it. Also, there is a 10% off link down below for new signups for these classes. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Hit me up in the comments down below with any feedback, hopefully all good, but any feedback is welcome. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one.